In today's Advanced Admin Study Group, we hit the topic of change management. Subscribe and then take a listen. Good morning, everyone. This is the Advanced Admin Study Group. We are hitting topics on change management today, and we will jump straight into our first presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I will turn it over, Algie, to you. You are our first presenter today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen.
Looks good.
Coming to a session today, we are going to discuss the topic of how to deploy the components from one organization to another organization using change set. If you want to deploy customization using change set, you should have both source and target organization to be connected. Okay, so let's begin this. We are going to discuss as part of this presentation, which includes what is change set, what kind of change set we have in Salesforce, how can we establish a connection between orgs like Sandbox to Sandbox or Sandbox to production. Next, how to create an outbound change set, and how to validate and deploy a change set. Let's start with what is a change set. A change set is a means by which one organization sends customization to another organization. We can prepare a set of components using a change set. Change set only contains the components what you can make through the setup menu. Okay, and change set may contain customization to the existing components or new components. But you cannot use the change set for deleting or renaming the components. And one more thing, you can't upload data through the change set. You can upload custom metadata, but not the records of custom object or standard object. Okay?
I would make one minor change there, and you can challenge me if you would like, but the third bullet there, change sets can only contain modifications made through the setup menu. You could include code that could be done outside of Salesforce or outside of that setup menu. So Apex classes, triggers, those types of things, your Lightning components, things that you're building, maybe even in the developer console, can all be a part of a change set there.
Okay. Thank you for the information. Thank you.
Terry, one other point too, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong on the fourth bullet. You cannot change API names, but you can change label names, for example. So there are some changes that you can and cannot make. So just wanted to point that out, but you cannot change API names, but you can change label names.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I see where you're going with that. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because if you change an API name, it would treat it as if it's a brand new object because it won't find that in the org that you're deploying to. So,
but if you want to rename opportunities, potential donors, you can do that in a change set, and that change would take effect. But
that
you
is true.
Change that API name.
And I really wish we could do deletes, but that would be really nice. All right, sorry for the interruption there.
Yeah.
That's good.
So next, what kind of change sets are available in Salesforce? We have two kinds of change set. They are outbound change set and inbound change set. What is the outbound change set? It is the change set created in the source organization you are logged into and want to send to another organization and ready to upload in that organization. Now, what is inbound change set? When you upload an outbound change set, It will be available as an inbound change set in the destination organization where you want to validate and deploy the change set. And until you deploy the components, those components won't be reflected into the destination organization. Now, as I told you, to deploy components from one organization to another organization, there should be a connection established between those two organizations. So what we have to do? If you see here, you have to do one thing. You have to go to the destination org and go to the setup and click deploy under environments and then open deployment settings. Now, you can see the different deployment connection in this production org, such as all the sandboxes or other orgs available. Okay, now you just need to click on edit to establish the connection between particular organization. See here. For example, here I want to accept a change set from a developer sandbox to this production org. So you just need to check the allow inbound changes checkbox. After enabling this checkbox, you can upload outbound changes change set from developer sandbox, and it will be available as inbound change set in this production org. Okay. Now, next topic is how to create an outbound change set. So you know where we have to create outbound change set. It is in the source org, from which we want to move the components to the destination org. So you need to go to setup, then environments, and click outbound change set under change set. And there you can create the outbound change set by clicking the button new. Here you can specify the change set name and description about the release and all, and click save. And it will take you to the change set detail page where you can add components to the change set. Okay, now if you see here, you have change set components and profile set components. As I told you, whatever configuration you can add the setup components in the change set components. And if you want to add profile with field permission, you need to add that field in the change set components. Okay. Here is the change set adding page, components adding page. Here you can add a variety of components from your source org. After selecting the required components, click add to change set to add to the change set. So whenever you do all these things, as a best practice, first of all, what we have to do is before release, you need to prepare a checklist, because you may forget something. Checklist is the list of components which you want to release or deploy from Sandbox to your product org in this release. It depends on your organization, where and how you are going to maintain the checklist. If you feel you are missing something, you can click view or add dependencies, where you can see the dependent components of the components you already added in the change set. So you should add the dependent components if it gives a deployment error when it is missing. Now, after adding all these components, you can upload the change set to the target organization. Once your change set is uploaded successfully, you will get an email referencing source and destination org. And once uploaded, you cannot recall the change set from the destination org. Also at the same time, you can clone the change set and reuse it for more updates, and you can upload it again. Now let's go to the inbound change set in the destination org to deploy. So as you can see, after the uploading the outbound chain set, it is available as inbound chain set in the destination org. It is ready for deployment and validation and deployment. We can open the inbound chain set and click on validate. So this is the validation page. As you can see, you have different kinds of options for validating. This is basically for executing the test classes. Basically, if you are moving from a sandbox to sandbox, they won't consider test classes. But if you are moving from sandbox to production, it will consider the test classes. So for default option, if it is sandbox, then no tests are executed. If it is a production org and it contains Apex classes or triggers, it will execute all the local tests. And the local tests are the tests that include all tests except the test included in the managed packages. And other options are run local test, run all test, and run specified test. And one more thing, if we are doing the validation, in the case of production or if the code coverage is less than 75%, the validation will fail and gives the fatal error. So in case of sandbox, it won't give any validation error if we go for default option because it is not executing the test classes in that cases. So as a best practice, it's good to keep the code coverage from 80 to 90%. And after successful validation, we can go for deploying the chain set. And once it is completed, you can go to the setup and check whether the new changes are available. And as per latest release, by using chain set, we can deploy 10,000 files at a time. And that's a limitation here. So these are some references for chain set. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Very good. Any questions from anybody on change sets? Are you using them frequently or?
Yeah, I use them all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, same. I did notice one thing that I'd never paid attention to until just now. There's a profiles section that LG showed earlier.
Yep.
You can also transfer permission sets, and that's what threw me off is because I know I've transferred permission sets, but they're up under just the regular change set or elements that you would add to a change set.
The components.
Under permissions. Yep.
Good, good. Anybody else have any experience with that process that would be helpful for the group?
I feel like it's a pretty cumbersome process.
I was just going to say, I wish it was easier.
Right. Yeah.
It's easy to forget to add things.
Yeah.
You get them working in the sandbox and you got to remember everything that's included.
Yeah. And that dependency button will help with that. But I mean, just if you're adding like a couple fields, you're going to get like 1,000 other things that are dependent on it. So it kind of gets so bloated that it's hard to have it be significantly valuable.
Yeah, my section actually that I'm going to talk about today speaks to some of that. So
okay, well, very good. So that's awesome. So let's jump over then to Andrew. And Andrew kind of had a little bit of a tough one, but I'll let him kind of talk through it because his, in the study guide it talks about the Force.com IDE, which is technically expiring. So go ahead, Andrew. We do not hear you.
I've done that.
There you go.
All right. So again, the topic today is change management, which is 10%, which means you can probably expect about 7 questions on the exam for this topic. And specifically today, I'm talking about Force.com IDE, which transitioned into Visual Studio Code, also known as VS Code, also known as VSC. So here are the resources for today. And then I would also say in this particular topic, again, you can probably expect 2 to 3 questions on this. So probably not a lot, but still worth noting. And today, again, I'm going to talk about Force.com IDE, then Visual Studio or VS Code extensions, the ANT migration tool, got a couple of quiz questions, and then any questions from you guys. So Force.com IDE. First of all, IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. And this was an Eclipse plugin mostly used by developers for local development and deployment. You're wondering, Eclipse is a Java-based integrated development environment, again, used by developers to do integrations with Salesforce. It could be used to deploy components to any org, which is worth noting, including an unrelated org. For example, you could take metadata components from a developer edition to a production org. And metadata components could also be deleted from an org using Force.com IDE. And all this is in past tense because as of October 2019, support updates, documentation, and downloads for Force.com IDE are no longer available. Oops, back one. So Salesforce recommends using, and the current exam guides updated to reflect the Salesforce extensions for Visual Studio Code instead. So you may get questions on the exam for Force.com IDE. You may get a question for Visual Studio Code instead. Also speaking about Force.com IDE, some of the required components, here's some screenshots. You have to have a project name, an org username, password and token, the environment, and the project components. So now transitioning into Visual Studio Code or VS Code, it is powered by Salesforce CLI. CLI stands for Command Line Interface, and the Salesforce APIs. APIs are Application Programming Interface. And it allows you to deploy and retrieve from your sandboxes to other development orgs. You can also manage push to and pull from your Scratch org. You can write, debug, and refactor your org's code. And it requires 4 things to use. First, you have to have Salesforce CLI installed. You have to create a new Salesforce DX project. Salesforce DX is a whole nother thing. It's essentially tools and features to improve efficiency of the development application lifestyle. There's also, you need to install Java Platform, Standard Edition, and you have to have Visual Studio installed. So a lot of prerequisites for that. Another related tool is the ANT migration tool. This is a Java ANT-based command line utility for moving metadata between a local directory and a Salesforce org. And essentially what this does, it uses the deploy and retrieve calls, but it does it sort of behind the scenes. So it allows you to do it with clicks rather than code. And it's best used in these scenarios. If you are going to do a development project for which you need to populate a test environment with a lot of setup changes, for multi-stage release processes, you had a lot of repetitive deployment using the same parameters, or if your migration from stage production is done by IT. And also scheduling batch deployments is another feature of the ANT migration tool. So question time. Anyone can take this. So which 2 tools below have the capability of deploying metadata between organizations regardless of whether they're related or not? Anyone?
I'm going to go with D, force.com migration tool, and A, unmanaged packages.
Would want to confirm or challenge? A second?
I'll go B and D.
All right. Final answer is correct, B and D. And again, it's worth noting change sets are for related orgs, whereas force.com IDE allows you to do unrelated. So that's the key in this question's phrasing. Next one. Say Terry went to a conference, heard about force.com IDE. He asked you to configure it. You've come back to him for additional information. So what do you need to use force.com IDE? And for this one, there's 3 right answers. So which one of these is incorrect? Anyone?
C, D.
D. Anyone want to confirm or not confirm? It is actually B, C, and D. Don't need the first thing, but you do need all these other components.
What do you mean by metadata components? I was struggling between A and B.
So if we go back.
Oh, I didn't mean to make you go all the way back. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Oh, selected metadata components. Okay. Interesting. That's a good way to answer it.
There you go.
So what that's doing in there is it's determining what metadata you want to have brought down into your local development environment. So if you want to bring down classes, so your Apex code, then you can select that. You can kind of see there with that first bullet, the Apex and Visual Force. That's frequently what's brought down. It's your classes, triggers, pages, components, static resources. That's kind of the common or default set of metadata. But you can bring down, at least we used to when we were using this. You can do it with VS Code as well, but you could bring down any of the metadata from the org. So we used to use this as a way of backing up our metadata back in the day. It was a way of just bringing everything down into a local environment, just as a kind of a disaster recovery or backup perspective.
Used it too in a past life for creating a bunch of fields at one time too. So you can pull down an object, all the metadata around an object, which includes all the fields in that object. But it's XML based. So
Yeah.
you have to create the fields in an XML format, and you can push them back up. But all the metadata is all the fields and objects in setup.
So help.
Yeah, one last question. Say Terry needs to make some changes in a source code control system. Which 2 tools below allow him to do that? 2 are right, 2 are not right. Any takers?
B and C.
That is correct. Very good.
Nice.
Any questions from anyone about this? And if not, I would also say if you're interested in Salesforce DX, I would check out Trailhead DX. It's a whole conference based around it, which I think is twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the main topic you're going to get with this is essentially which tools to use based on which scenarios. So I would check out this link as well.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. So that's good. That's perfect. Yeah, because you're not going to be asked to verify whether code is right or wrong. You're not going to be asked questions about how do you query data. It's capabilities and scenario based. It would be what I would expect for you to see. And there are, there's other tools, but I don't think you're going to get quizzed on third party. Well, I know you won't get quizzed on third party tools. So I think you're pretty safe there. I didn't see anything at all in the study guide about the APIs. You have any thought, Carla, on where they're not knowing the different types of APIs would be?
I don't think for the advanced admin exam that you would need to know any APIs, but just knowing like that the Force.com IDE and Salesforce DX, they're going to look at the metadata API.
Yeah.
There's a metadata API that they connect with to pull all that down and push metadata back and forth. So, I mean, I think high level, just knowing that, but any of the other APIs, I don't think would really make sense in this.
That's kind of what I was thinking too.
Yeah, scenario.
And Andrew, you mentioned something right at the very beginning about the study guide. You said it was updated to show VS Code now?
Correct, or at least that's what I found. I didn't see, essentially it's the same topic, they just changed the word Force.com IDE to VS Code extensions.
Okay.
That would make sense since that's not in, it's not supported anymore.
Yeah, I just didn't think that the exam had been released with that new topic yet. So,
I don't know.
So anyway, all right, good. Well, if it's on that study guide, then definitely follow that. That's very good. All right, Boone, you are up next unless there's other questions.
All right, cool. I had started talking, but realized I needed to unmute there. So, all right, and I'm gonna hope that I pulled out the right data. You guys had me focus on, kind of best practices, the SDLA, the development lifecycle. It pointed me more towards something similar, but I think I've got the right information, so we'll kind of talk about this. Algie did a great job of bringing up some best practices for, how you're developing your change sets and what you're looking at when it comes to those. So this is more overall, big picture, best practices is what I'm kind of focusing on here. So if you go think about what you're going to change in a Salesforce environment, there are some things that are safe to change in the production system. For example, dashboards and reports. Those are really easy, really safe to change because you're not affecting data in any major way. And when it comes to anything else, your automations, your objects, fields, all that stuff, you really want to look at doing those outside of a production organization. So that way you are able to test them properly before you bring them back to production. So if you do change the wrong things, you can create processing loops. I'll be the first to admit that I've accidentally done that before. It's not fun. You can make changes that you can't undo that modify data, logic errors. People think that they've lost things because they can't find fields anymore, and cats and dogs living together. So if you get my Ghostbusters reference there, so it's not fun. So highly recommend the Sandbox orgs. So that way, either development Sandbox orgs, partial sandboxes, or full sandboxes. If you want to know more, there's a lot of different types of sandboxes you can get. Those are the three main ones. So development orgs or development environments, and those are just like I mentioned, different sandboxes for you to be able to do work on and build stuff outside of a live production organization. You also cannot write Apex code directly in a production org. So that's another reason for having a development organization or a development or environment. So, and there's kind of some main strategies to going through this. You want to create your sandbox, your development org, kind of develop and test while you're in that sandbox to make sure that you're using the right tools and those types of things. You don't have to use code, but you can in that environment. Move your changes after you've done everything for testing and you feel confident with that. You can move it back to your production organization, test them one last time, and then release it out to your users. So with this in mind, this is kind of a subset version of what I ultimately found called the application lifecycle management. And this was referred to in a couple different areas with respect to Salesforce or Trailhead DX and a couple other things referencing development across Salesforce. If you notice those 4 steps, you have kind of your setup, your develop, your test, and then your release. But they've got some more steps in here, and technically releases up here. So there's some more tests. And if you want to get really advanced, you can look at this outside circle. And there's a lot more that you can do when you do look at, you can build packages, you can get your CLI involved. There's a lot more you can do and get pretty heavily into this life cycle from a development standpoint. What I'm focusing on here, and from pretty much what I was able to find for most of the guidelines for best practices on development, focused around these 6 in the center here.
I would recommend that you know that. Yeah, I would just recommend knowing that chart. I could see definitely some scenario-based questions around that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it probably won't go deep, but I would expect that as advanced admin would need to know this.
All right. And I do reference where this came from later on, so you guys can go back and capture that a little bit more in context and during the Salesforce conversation I had around this as well.
The other piece, I guess, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead, Terry.
The other piece related to that is that center, the core there, that VS Code as the source of truth. I think understanding that source of truth concept is also a very valid one for advanced admins to begin to understand. That and it could be that your source of truth, they're putting there that it's the VS Code. That could be a GitHub environment or something, which is what I'm kind of surprised it doesn't state that. But VS Code is going to interface in with your source control systems. So just wanted to point that out there as well.
Yeah, I think the reason they put the VS Code there in the middle is just exactly for that, where you're interfacing with VS Code, but the actual source of truth would be in a Git repository.
Yeah, and that's, you guys just mentioned this a couple minutes ago when you were talking about the Force IDE and VS Code, is you can download everything, all your metadata, your actual data, or any of the orgs out there, the sandboxes or the production org, and you can capture that information, store it. As you indicated, Terry, you use that as backup at some point. I've done the same thing. And once you've captured that, being able to have different versions of that, for those of you that aren't as familiar with like GitHub or something, it essentially, it records snapshots. All the metadata is, as Carla mentioned, is set up in XML files. So it looks at the difference between the files and tries to identify which one's the newer, which one's the older. And then, it can go back in time if you want to go back to a previous version. You can identify all the things that were changed between the current and the previous version, and then roll back to that if you need to. So there is quite a bit of power involved in that. All right. Running through the steps of the ALM cycle, plan the release, go through some design work, identify the specifications, identify what needs to be built, from an automation standpoint, what tools you're going to use to do that, kind of lay that out and try to figure out how you're going to do that before you ever think about doing something in Salesforce, because it'll help you later on and during this process. Step 2 is to actually develop, during that design process, identify what you can do from a clicks, not code standpoint. So you can use Process Builder and all your other flows and workflows, all those fun tools, and then identify what you need to build from a programmatic standpoint. In a lot of cases, you don't have to, but in some cases, you're forced to use VS Code or Force IDE or whatever. let's see. Testing is the next step. Once you've done the development in that sandbox, test your changes. Focus on the changes you've made to make sure that they work the way you expect them to. Don't worry about if it's you and 3 other people working on changes that are going to come together later on. Worry about them later on. Focus on making sure your changes that you've designed, work the way you're expecting them to. And then this is essentially your change set step, where you're aggregating all the things that you've created and modified and putting them in that change set so that you can deploy them to whatever other organization, you're either a sandbox org or a production org or whatever that you're moving to. Because as you'll see in the next step, you want to test. So in a lot of cases, I would recommend, if you're doing something that's fairly involved, mid-level to complex, I would recommend moving from your deployment to another sandbox to verify that your changes work in the way that you expect them to, your deployment works in the way you expect it to, and you know what things you're missing. Because once you deploy something, you might realize, oh yeah, I forgot that one little random thing that I forgot in the background, or that little other change that when I hit the related changes button, it didn't suck that in. And so that's a pretty important thing, is to be able to test all that. And this is where you're going to be testing with the other people that you're developing with. So if you're developing with 3 or 4 more people, you're going to all want to be on that same org to ensure that you're all working at the same time. All your stuff is working the same way. So, and this is where it doesn't really say this in the lifecycle management process, but I would, if you kind of look at different ways of programming and Scrum and those types of things, circle back multiple times. If you guys run into a problem while you're doing all the testing, go back to your design, figure out what didn't work on the development, test it again, bring it back to this stage again. And that'll allow you to, cycle through it and figure out how to make the changes faster and quicker so that you can rely on it better. And then I would make sure that you're testing these releases before you go to a live production. And going to that live production is the last stage on there, and that is essentially releasing it to your teammates or your users that will be using the system. And the big thing here is that's probably going to require training. That's going to require documentation, understanding how it's going to affect business processes and all that stuff. So it's just deploy the change set and you're done. There's actually a lot more involved with rolling out, making sure users are using it correctly, making sure they understand the problems. You'll probably find additional issues with the changes that you've made, so you got to document those and then go back to your, through your process to make sure that you're identifying those changes and fixing those things. And if you notice this picture, it's a circle that's connected all the way through. So as you get to this release, you're going to identify issues that need to be updated and fixed, and you're going to go back through that same cycle there. So let's see. So release timeframes. One other thing that's pretty important is identifying when to make those releases. If you're making, as I mentioned, those fixes that you can just do in the production, you can kind of go live with those as needed. If you're pushing out a new dashboard, you can push them out at the end of the day, or communicate to your team, hey, these dashboards are ready. Can I, set up a time to go through them with you? But if you're doing anything that's a minor or a major change, you need to consider when you're going to release those to your team. If it's once every few weeks, you want to make sure it's after work hours so you're not impacting the usability of the objects that you're deploying. Because when you deploy those objects in the production, it does make them partially inactive, or not inactive, but you can't write to them during that time. And so you need to be careful about that. You don't want to try and deploy during actual work times. Major changes, once a quarter, but this is, think of changes that are major business process changes. I kind of listed that one in the previous item, but if it impacts a lot of people, you're going to have to require training for your users and walk through them, have a significant handoff to your users. Then you're going to probably assume that that's a once a quarter release. And then I've mentioned this a couple times, but make sure you're communicating to your users. Don't just push changes out and assume that they'll find them. Make sure you're communicating what those changes were, why they are, how they're helping them, and any training that they might require to accept those changes, because you want to make sure that it's obvious to them that this is a value to them. They might not always see the value that comes out of those changes. One last thing I have on here, and I mentioned this earlier, is track the metadata that you've changed, meaning track the objects, fields, whatever it is you're changing in the system. If there's permissions that you're changing, if there are back-end systems you're enabling or things like that, in a lot of cases, you can't change those or add those to change sets. And so not only is it great to have documented, so you can add them to change sets, there's times when you can't add them to a change set and you have to manually make those changes again in the org that you're moving to. And so, there's a couple of examples of why it's important to track this, other than, you guys mentioned earlier, when working on these things, I kind of forget what changes I made. Well, it's important to make those changes. I couldn't remember any of the tools other than, a spreadsheet is one of the tools. I want to say isn't, there's development ticket tools, and I can't remember any of those tools off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've worked with any of them. But work tracking tickets that you can use to identify. Jira, thank you. That's one of them, where you can identify, here's the change I've made, and submit it into the system, and then it works along with your code tracking tools that we talked about in the center of that circle. When you have your GitHub and those types of things, when you check in your changes, in a lot of cases, you don't want to check in every tiny little change, but in some cases that might be a good way of doing it. But at least documenting that you've made those changes is pretty important. The last thing is here, a lot of this came from the Trailhead or Lifecycle and Development Models. These two are videos which had a decent amount of information in them as well. The one that showed that circle that Terry was referring to earlier is this middle one here. And they talk about the different elements of that. They focused again on that middle level, like I just focused on here. They didn't talk much about the exterior or the interior, but that is probably, again, something we might hear a little bit about. So, questions about that? Anything you guys think I missed? Terry or Carla?
No, I don't think so. I think it's interesting. This topic in general is an interesting topic because Salesforce has kind of grown up in the last few years related to this topic, and I think that's probably why we see this on. We're going to see this more, I think, on an advanced admin, because just as admins. I go back to our for those of you that was at our user group meeting last week here in Des Moines, our presenter made the comment that admins are leaders, and I think that this is an area where I kind of see that happening, especially with those of you who are advanced admins, where understanding some of these key concepts for managing your Salesforce orgs is really important. It isn't just a side application in businesses anymore. It is a critical application. And when you're thinking about this concept of releasing changes into your org, you were used to kind of cowboy it a lot and just do it in production, make the change and not worry about it. That's a dangerous proposition anymore with our orgs. And so to understand some of these techniques, I think is something that, whether it's on the exam or not, I think it's a topic that we really need to begin to grasp a hold of and start implementing in our environments if we're not already.
I second all of that for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
I would definitely say that I've seen that over the years as well. The transition from when Force.com IDE first came out, and how they talked about it through to today, and how they've got somebody in the chat mentioned earlier that they signed up for the Trailhead DX tool or training on some more information on that. You can definitely see how they're progressing on the DevOps, and more of that is progressing into the environment. And I have a silly question. How do I stop sharing my desktop?
The green button, the same green button that you use to share it.
It's not showing up.
Oh, actually,
you're seeing what I see on the screen.
I had that issue last week. You had to steal it away from me, Terry.
All right, okay. I will do that.
You gave them access to share, but you didn't give them access to not share?
Maybe. Maybe. I'm just kind of mean that way. All right, let me just share to something, and then I'll stop sharing.
There we go.
And all right, cool. So a couple questions, random. I don't have them in a format since we've got a little extra time, a couple minutes. When we're thinking about change sets and some of the items that we can move in a change set, let's consider the fact that I am working on a existing flow. The flow has already been deployed into production. I'm making changes to that flow in the sandbox, and I'm ready to move that in my change set. So I get the change set deploys just fine, but I'm not seeing the new behavior from the flow changes that I made. Why is that?
Got to activate it.
Yeah, that's right. And what other items are similar to that I would have to activate?
The ability to run flows. In your production org, did your users have that ability turned on or off? But in your sandbox, you had that turned on. So
okay, and I was thinking other features of Salesforce.
Process builders.
Yeah. Yeah. Any others?
Do you have to still do it for workflow rules?
I was trying to remember that one too. I knew it was going to come up, and it's like, oh, darn.
I don't
remember.
I try to flow everything nowadays.
I know. I do too. I haven't touched a workflow rule for probably over a year, other than to get rid of them.
Approval process.
Approval process.
Oh,
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
that's a good call out.
Yep. Yeah. Very good. Other gotchas with change sets that are similar to that you can think of? How many of you move your profiles with change sets?
Remember.
It's terrible.
Permission sets, but not profiles.
Very good. All right. I did do a release just this last weekend, and I did move profiles with it. And as far as I know, it went okay. So it was one of those that it's like, man, that is way too huge if I don't. That's why I took the risk. I thought the fallout would be easier to deal with than having to manually fix the security.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good.
I'd say another one, if you have a custom field and it's not showing up in your layout, to check your visibility.
Mm-hmm.
Field level security.
Yeah, I forget to do that a lot. And I sit there and refresh the page. Very confused for a while.
Yep. Another one that I forget to do frequently is Apex classes. Those all have to be assigned after deployment.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I could see some random questions maybe around those types of things, because it'd be really easy to build a scenario-based question on, well, why doesn't this work? I deployed it. Good.
Yeah, I could definitely see a question or two around the movement between the sandboxes, like a dev sandbox and then like a UAT environment and then a production. That sort of progression through the life cycle. There'd probably be a question about that.
Yeah.
Hey, Carla, since you mentioned user acceptor training, I was on the life cycle. Is that 5 Bravo or 6 Alpha in that life cycle? Because we didn't talk about user acceptor testing. We talked about training. So
right.
How does that?
The ALM cycle that Boone showed, I think, is the most updated graphic that they have. I've seen other graphics where that is actually called out. I think the one that Boone showed was more around release management and using Visual Studio Code and the Salesforce DX level of ALM. But what we're talking about there, I can see if I can find it, but there's one that talks about doing it in like a developer pro sandbox and then moving it to or a partial copy or full copy sandbox and then moving to production. So there's some good graphics around that. But knowing that is the best practices is yep.
This one kind of talks about the different sandboxes.
Yeah, and knowing that that's best practice is key, I think, for advanced admins with or without the test. Knowing that is very, very helpful.
Did you share that link with us, Terry? Or can you share that link with us? I almost say you did, but
I have no idea if the content of it is good, but it had a picture that looked good.
That picture, I think, is in Trailhead too, or something similar.
Yeah, I think the top picture is in the Trailhead that I referenced, but I'm not. Yep. This is the first time I'd seen that bottom one, so.
There you go. It's in your chat, and for those watching online, I'll throw all of the links as well into the description on the videos. Cool.
And one question I was just going to say is everybody familiar with the different sandboxes? I mean, we've thrown around partial and production and developer and that type of thing.
I believe we had that as a topic.
Okay.
I think early on, maybe.
So too.
It feels like we had talked through that one.
Didn't we discuss knowing at least some of the storage limitations? Or
I'm trying to remember because I can easily confuse other study groups with this. But
that might have also almost been one of the other study groups because
it might have been. I don't see anything in the study guide specific to those sandboxes, but I think again as an advanced admin, I think it's fair. It would be a fair assumption for those writing these questions to assume you know that.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that I was talking with Meredith this last Friday, I think it was, and that makes this particular exam a little bit harder is that, especially even harder to study for, is that we're assuming that we're starting off with that base knowledge of already being an admin or a platform app builder. And so it's really extending beyond that and understanding some of these more concepts that we perhaps don't play with every day or don't get involved in every day. And so it's I know for me, and I don't know, Carla, how you have felt about it, but for me, even leading this study group is a bigger challenge than what some of the other ones were, because you talk about app builder or sysadmin, those are things that we do in our sleep. I would hope all of us at this point do in our sleep. So this one takes it to that next level, and it's a little bit more of a challenge. And so when you have questions, I have to stop and think, I wonder, I don't remember, when was the last time I did that? It's definitely harder.
Yep. I
do
just
you go ahead, Carla.
I just threw a link. I found that graphic in Trailhead, so you can
perfect.
grab that link.
Do you think there would be anything on the test about moving experiences
Experience
to
that.
change sets or the change processes involved with that? It gets pretty convoluted, but I don't know if it, focused on the test, if it would be.
I don't
think so.
think that it would.
Mm-mm.
I think you're talking more concepts here, and would they throw a scenario at you? That maybe, but I wouldn't. I think if they do, I would expect that you could answer it based off of a general understanding.
Yeah, more general.
Mm-hmm.
And with 3 minutes left, who's waiting for the DevOps Center?
Sounds awesome.
Sounds awesome.
It looks awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I have a video if anybody wants to see it.
Yeah, actually, if you don't
Send it
mind,
across.
shoot that.